All right. Hello and welcome to this session of the Chinese Business History webinar here at the Hong Kong Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Hong Kong. My name is Ghassan Moazin. I'm an assistant professor here at the Institute, and I'm also joined by the co-convener of the webinar series, Dr. John Wong, here with me. So today we are very pleased and honored to welcome to the webinar series Professor Elizabeth Sinn, who is, of course, honorary professor at the Institute and previously was the deputy director of the Center of Asian Studies, so the predecessor of our institute. I think I don't need to, I think most of you will be familiar with Professor Sinn's work, but of course she has published very widely on the history of Hong Kong, of overseas Chinese. And I think both with her books and articles, she's very well known to all of you. She's also currently served as an expert advisor to the Hong Kong Museum of History and works also with the Hong Kong Chronicles Project and has done a lot of work on Hong Kong heritage, for which she was awarded the Bronze Bohemia Star in 2004. And she's today going to talk to us about her newest project, which already has been published, a bit of it has been published recently in the Journal of the Hong Kong branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. And I think today we're going to see another facet of that particular work. Her talk today is entitled Forgotten Pioneer, the On-Tai Insurance Company Limited of Hong Kong, 1877 to 1900. Before I hand things over to Professor Sinn, let me just say that we have our usual format. So Professor Sinn is going to talk for around 30 minutes, and then we'll have some time for question and answers. So if you have any questions for Professor Sinn, please just submit them through the Q&A button in Zoom, and I will then read them out during the Q&A period. Elizabeth, if you're ready, please feel free to get started.
Good morning. Thank you, Ghassan and John, for inviting me to speak. This is a great opportunity for me to present my work. It's still work in progress, and I hope that with your questions and comments, I'll be able to put in more work before I publish this article. The On-Tai Insurance Company was a pioneer in China, in the sense that it was the first insurance company, Chinese-owned and operated insurance company, and the first one in Hong Kong. So it's one of the first in China and the first one in Hong Kong. So it's a groundbreaker in the development of Chinese business history. It was also the first Chinese-owned and operated joint stock company incorporated under the Hong Kong Companies Ordinance of 1865. So this company is important in showing the entrepreneurial spirit among Chinese capitalists in Hong Kong, with a willingness to experiment with different forms of business, different types of business, different ways to make money, and using different forms of capital formation and to work within different legal frameworks. But what is interesting is, despite its significance, this company is largely unknown. Only Carl Smith mentioned it in relation to Hoa Mei, whom I will speak a little bit more of later, and only very briefly mentioned in other works on Hong Kong's insurance history or in Hong Kong's financial history. The result is a very distorted or an incomplete picture of Chinese capital formation and activities in Hong Kong in the 19th century. And perhaps even to stretch it a little bit more of the economic activities of Chinese in China. The two people that I will be talking about, Li Sing and Hoa Mei. Li Sing owned the company, was one of the big owners of the company, and Hoa Mei, who operated the company, were two of the movers and shakers who owned in Hong Kong. And yet we don't talk a lot about them in these terms. And I think one of the problems is Westerners tend to stress the role of compradors, and neither Li Sing nor Hoa Mei was a comprador, all right? And so by looking at the work of these two people, perhaps we can reassess the role of non-comprador Chinese businessmen in Hong Kong and in China too. Well, I have, before I start, I have a disclaimer to make. I'm not a business historian, and this research on the on-tie insurance is not business history as such. And maybe it's counterproductive trying to divide knowledge into too many categories and over-departmentalize historians into this or that type of historian. And for myself, I just feel that I'm a historian interested in different aspects of the past. I'm writing about the on-tie insurance company as a chapter of my book, which is the biography of this man, Hoa Mei, who I consider one of the most dynamic and controversial characters in 19th century Hong Kong. Among other things, he managed on-tie for over 20 years, and I soon discovered that the company was really important, but sadly overlooked by historians. So at first, I was just writing a chapter in this book on Hoa Mei, but this chapter became quite fascinating to me. I was just going to write about this insurance company, and suddenly this insurance company became a lot more important than I had before. Much more important than I had believed at the beginning. So I'm going to talk about this company, but before I do so, I'm going to say a little bit about the history of insurance in China. At first, it was mainly operated by foreign companies. In the 18th and 18th century, with the East India Company monopoly, it was hard for other foreign traders to get their ships or get their goods insured. So they no longer tried not to depend on London and set up their own insurance companies or insurance groups in the China region. In 1805, Dent and Jardine Matheson, these are the two big traders in Guangzhou, started the Canton Insurance Society. And it was mainly a sort of group, is an ad hoc group, it was not a company, just pooling shipping risks of the companies to cover each other. And in 1835, Dent left the partnership and set up another company, the Union Insurance Company, and in Macau. Hong Kong was not, had not become an international port yet. And in 1836, Jardine formed the Canton Insurance Company, which then moved to Hong Kong in 1842. In 1862, the Russell and Company founded the Yangtze Insurance Company, and in conjunction with its Shanghai Steam Navigation Company. So slowly, the foreign companies were setting up insurance companies right here in China, rather than depend on the insurance companies in London or even in India. And in 1871, the Chinese Insurance Company was set up in Hong Kong. And what is interesting about this company was that it had many Chinese investors who were very keen to invest in insurance companies. And it was stipulated in their constitution that there should at least be 2 Chinese directors on the board. But the company was not run by Chinese, all right? And nominally, it was not a Chinese-owned company. Despite the setting up of these foreign insurance companies in China, the Chinese ship owners and traders had a disadvantage because their properties were not insured. In other words, the foreign companies would not insure their properties. And if they did, they would only insure ships and not the cargo. And the premium was very high. So you can see that the Chinese ship owners and traders were at a great disadvantage because they couldn't really compete with their foreign counterparts on the same terms. Now, in 1865, the Chinese did not have insurance companies, I have to say this, right? And they did not, they had their own ways of insuring their properties, which was actually not easy to use. And for small companies, it was very difficult to have any kind of insurance in the sense of the old insurance system, right? Those insurance practices. In 1865, in Shanghai, the first Chinese insurance company was founded. It was very small. It was actually the subsidiary of a bigger company, and it only insured cargo and not entire vessels. But there was one breakthrough. The forms were printed in English and Chinese, all right? And for Chinese users or Chinese customers, this was really, really very important. And so for the first time, they knew exactly what the terms and the conditions of their contracts were, what their risks and what their risks were, all right? So the language has always been a very big issue. In 1875, the Chinese merchant steam navigation company, the Zhaoshangju, established its own insurance company called the Yanwo Insurance Company, which also became very important. At first, the Zhaoshangju's insurance company only insured its own ships. And because of the great demand, everybody else wanted the Zhaoshangju to insure them. So its services extended to other traders and ships as well. And what was very obvious was that the market was there. The market was hungry for insurance services. And so this is where the Ontai Insurance Company comes in. The Ontai was established, the prospectus came out in 1876, and it was actually incorporated in 77. And in the prospectus, it says that its aim was to provide risk protection to Chinese ship owners and cargo owners rejected by Western insurance companies, which means that you can't get insured by the Western insurance companies, come to us. And to capitalize on a profitable market, and to seeing the success of the Yanwo, the insatiable market despite Yanwo's establishment, lots of opportunities were still there to be exploited. And this is the next one is important: to prevent business profits from being scattered abroad, that is reaped by foreign companies. The foreign companies come in, they take money, they make money, and they take them away back to their home countries. And so the Ontai said, well, we're going to stop this. We're going to make sure that we make profit in China and the profits stay in China. And the insurance opens another front for Chinese businesses to compete with foreign businesses. The rhetoric of defending Chinese commercial interest was part of the self-strengthening ideology of the time. And those of you who have looked at companies' prospectus will know that very often there was a lot of platitudes, right? Some of them were genuine and some of them were just sort of fluff. Anyway, but it is true that the Ontai became very much part of the self-strengthening movement in terms of competing with foreign company interests. And this is a notice of the Ontai Insurance Company in the newspapers. It shows you the, this is better. It shows you the amount of capital, who the directors were, and the manager, Hoa Mei, and what kind of services it offered, and where its head office was, and so forth, right? So its initial capital was 400,000 taels, which is what's equivalent to about $55,000. But the shares were all slapped up right at the beginning, all right? So 2 years later, it increased its capital to 600,000 taels, or $830,000, right? So it was very popular to the investors, all right? And it shows you, this advertisement shows you who the directors were, both in Chinese and in English, all right? And they were Sinn, we should remember that. And they were all the leading businessmen in Hong Kong. And the share prices of the Ontai was also listed in these market intelligence or share price lists in the newspapers. So it was a known company then operating along with the other foreign insurance companies, right, in different on different levels. The Ontai was the first Chinese-owned company to be incorporated under the Companies Ordinance of 1865. Now, this ordinance had been transplanted from England primarily to protect British companies' interest and also to encourage foreign companies, particularly British companies, to set up companies in China, so that the Companies Ordinance was to protect their capital if they set up companies in China. This it governed the distribution of capital and the liability of members of the companies and governments. That is, it made it very clear who were responsible for debts, right, and to what extent they were responsible for debt. All shareholders had to be registered with the Register of Companies for transparency. Now, this is very important because up to this point, many companies were set up as partnerships. And it was easy for some of the partnerships, some of the companies, to list as partners people who really were not the owners, in the sense that they really didn't have the money, but they were the front people, all right? So that if there was any trouble, the real owners would run away, and these guys were left holding the can, right? Now, with the Companies Ordinance, it made it much more specific that the shareholders had to register, and their identities would be made clear to everybody, right? And because it was a limited company, the statements of profit and loss, asset and liability, etc., had to be published, and they all had to be edited, audited. The books had to be inspected by government inspectors and so on, to provide a lot of safeguards for investors, for customers, and for creditors. And so this safeguard against fraud is really important, and I would refer you to Michael Lee's article on bankruptcy law and partnerships, where he shows how fraud could be committed by a lot of companies that were not registered. Actually, his accent was not, his emphasis was not on partnerships or non-partnerships. His accent was on bankruptcy, all right? Not on whether the company was incorporated or not. But it's an excellent article showing the balance between legislation and ethics, right? Whether a company, or in the old days, companies observed ethical standards, and in fact, the introduction of something like the bankruptcy law could destabilize that kind of ethical standard. And the Company Ordinance also regulated the processes of winding up. And in fact, almost huge, many pages of the ordinance covered the proceedings of winding up. And this is very important because it means that people don't just run away. And also it was important because in 1899, the Ontai was actually liquidated, all right? And so this was kind of a sad ending, but we can see how being incorporated under the Companies Ordinance kind of framed Ontai's existence. The reaction to, so this is how Ontai was set up, by incorporated under the Companies Ordinance. The company showed that it was ready to subject itself to legal constraints and work to the new standard of commercial practice. It was reassuring to investors, customers, and creditors. And it, of course, by being a limited company, it gave the company a lot of status too. Now, what was the reaction to Ontai when it was set up? It was the first Chinese-owned and operated insurance company. In Hong Kong, there was a lot of stir. Some of its competitors, like the Chinese insurance company, founded, run by Ollivant, admitted that the establishment of Ontai was a challenge to its own business. And it used the Ontai's establishment to explain why it didn't do that well in 1878, the year after Ontai was established. In Aberdeen, in Scotland, the newspapers also picked up that Ontai was established, and its reaction was, oh, well, these Chinese people, if there's money to be made, the Chinese would catch on sooner or later. So that even though they didn't have insurance business before, if they knew that insurance business was profitable, they would come in and take it on as well. And in California, there was great, people were upset. The local merchants were upset because they thought that here comes the Chinese again. At first they came as laborers, then they came as merchants. Now they set up the insurance company, and they're going to take away a lot of business from the American companies, right? So there was a lot of jealousy and and in California especially, every time the Chinese did everything, it was always a threat to Western interest. So it shows the anti-Chinese climate at that time in California. But what is also interesting is that it actually sounds very familiar to us today, right? So it was this bogeyman, Chinese bogeyman. I'm going to introduce two people at this point. One is Sinn, who was the money man behind the insurance company. He's a long story, but he ran he operated a number of businesses in shipping, in labor recruitment, in import-export, in opium, insurance, remittance, and foreign currency. All right, so he was a really big businessman in China. And as I said, he was not a comprador. And in Hong Kong, he had a number of companies, the Wuhang and the Laihang and Ontai Insurance. And in San Francisco, he also had a number of branches and associate companies. So he had this big business empire. He was in trading the South-North trade, which is along the China coast in Southeast Asia, and also the California trade, that is the cross-Pacific trade between Hong Kong and California. So he was involved in many, many types of businesses involving very wide geographical scope, right? So he was the money man. And he was actually very entrepreneurial, very pioneering, ready to try new things. The other man that I would like to talk about is Hoa Mei, and I'm writing his biography. Hoa Mei came to Hong Kong in the early 1850s, maybe, and he studied English under James Legge, and his English became very fluent. He went to Australia, engaged in small businesses. At that time, the Chinese were also going to California, to Australia for the gold. And he acted as interpreter in court. And he showed at that early date, in his mid-20s, that he was a fighter for justice. And he, in the courts as interpreter, he was very often taking the side of the Chinese miners who were the defendants, or the Chinese who were the defendants. And they were quite helpless against the English-speaking court. And so Hoa Mei very often, in interpreting for them, were also kind of taking their sides, to the extent that the prosecutor told him that, hey, you're just the interpreter, you're not the defense lawyer, right? So he had this natural instinct for fighting for justice. And it's not just a front. And we'll see that through his life, this instinct was this compulsion to fight for justice was reflected. While he was in Australia, he was the first Chinese to introduce Chinese miners to New Zealand, where gold was also discovered. He married a white Australian woman. He returned to Hong Kong and worked around Hong Kong, Guangzhou area in the customs, first for the government and also for the customs services. And before he came back to Hong Kong in 1877 as the manager of the insurance company, he was the customs banker in Shantou. What this means was he was responsible for the money transactions of the Maritime Customs Service in Shantou. So that was a very important job that involved finances, accounting, that would expose him to foreign shipping and insurance and so forth. So that really prepared him very well for his job as secretary for the On Tai Insurance Company. And he didn't just stop at the On Tai. As a member of the On Tai Insurance Company, his social status was greatly enhanced. He became the first Chinese to join the Chamber of Commerce, which had up to this point been dominated by Western companies and Western businessmen. And at this Chamber of Commerce, he used it as a platform to express his own opinions, which were very often pro-China opinions. And he was often defending Chinese policies. He became the chairman of the Dong Hospital in 1882, which was a great honor. Actually, Li Sing was one of the founders of the Dong Hospital, which was organized by the Chinese business elite in Hong Kong. It became a kind of roll call for the Chinese merchant elite. So by becoming the chairman of the Dong Hospital, Ho Mei was recognized as a community leader. And he continued to fight for the interest and the rights of the Hong Kong Chinese community. He was also the first person later to form the Chinese Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong. He promoted the repealing of the night pass system. From about the 1850s onwards, Chinese were compelled to carry a night pass if they wanted to go out at night from, say, 9 to 6 o'clock in the morning. And they could only get a night pass from the police station, right? So, so for Chinese, it was both very inconvenient and very humiliating. And of course, when the Chinese merchants became more powerful, they felt very humiliated, even when they were big businessmen, to have to carry these night passes when they went out at night. Right? And so later in 1896, Ho Mei stood up and said, well, told the government, you've got to repeal this law. And it was repealed. It was a very big, it's very dramatic event when he spoke up for the Chinese community and got his way. Not only was he very active in Hong Kong, he was also very active in his connections with the Guangzhou authorities and the Chinese authorities. And during the French-Chinese War from 1884 to 1886, he was in Hong Kong informing Zhang Zhidong of all the French movements. Every day, he was almost every day, he would send telegrams to Zhang Zhidong, telling him about the movements of French ships coming into Hong Kong, how many men they carried, how many guns were on board, how much provision was being brought into Hong Kong, how much provision was being brought into Hong Kong for the military in Vietnam and so forth. So he was very closely connected with the Guangdong authorities. And he also used his position as the manager of the insurance company and also as the chairman of Dong Hospital to mobilize Chinese around the world whenever there was any donation that was needed in China for relief, of famine relief or drug relief or flood relief, right? So he used his network to raise money from the Chinese, moved the money back to, transmitted the money back to Hong Kong, to the insurance company, and then sent it back to China. And because of all this good work he did for China, and because he had money, he was able to buy for himself honorary title as a assistant magistrate. But more importantly, he also brought on honors for his deceased parents. And so they were known by their official titles. But also he was able to get the right to build these archways in his hometown, home village in Nanhai, in commemoration of his parents. All right. And this was really bringing honor to the family. All right. This Guangzhong Yaozhu agenda that many Chinese men held in the 19th century. So he was a mover and shaker who worked for the community, who worked for Chinese interests, but also worked for his own interests as well. And coming back to his business interest, Hoa Mei and Li Sing was a very formidable combo. All right, Li Sing with the money, with the vision, and Hoa Mei with the skills, with management skills, with the operational skills, with his networking skills. Apart from the on-time insurance, the two of them also went into other businesses. Actually, one of the very interesting proposals they made was to set up an opium monopoly in Hong Kong, to buy up all the opium in India that was to be imported to China, which meant that all the opium that from India that would be imported into China would first come to Hong Kong, pay their duties and all the taxes that would be necessary once they got to China, so that the tax collection became very, very simple and convenient, which was something that collecting taxes from all kinds of imports, particularly opium, had been a big headache for the Chinese government. So this proposal for an opium monopoly set up in Hong Kong not only would bring profit to the syndicate concerned, but would also assist the Chinese government in the collection of import duties, and even the Li Jin, which was an inland tariff. These two guys also formed the Wahab Canton Hong Kong Telegraph Company. The idea was to build a telegraph line from Guangzhou to Hong Kong. And once they got to Hong Kong was the terminus of different lines that connected Hong Kong with the overseas, all right? So the Guangzhou to Hong Kong line would be a very crucial line. They started building the line, but once the line got to the border, that is the border between Chinese territory and British territory in Kowloon. Now we have to remember this was the 1880s. So the Kowloon Peninsula boundary came up only to Boundary Street, all right? So south of Boundary Street was British possession, and north of Boundary Street was still Chinese territory. So they built the line up to near the boundary, actually near Meifu Sanqun in Daohuaking. And the British says, no, you can't come any further, because what the British wanted was to keep the Hong Kong line, the line within Hong Kong from the Boundary Street to Hong Kong to a British company. All right. So that is another very interesting story, which I've started writing it, and I hope that I'll be able to present that story at some point to the Institute. And the next big thing that Hoa Mei and Li Sing got into was the silver mine in Silver Mine Bay. I won't get into it now, but I'm sure those of you who are familiar with Hong Kong know that on Lantau Island there is a silver mine bay, and the mine that they operated is right there in Silver Mine Bay, and I think it was the silver mine that gave the name to Silver Mine Bay. And there are all kinds of other business enterprises that were being proposed to the Chinese government as well, which I won't have time to go into. But let me just say a little bit more about the Ontai in action. The Ontai had a huge geographical span of services. We'll see that in a minute. It ensured, in terms of the size of the function, it ensured both ships and cargo, right? And I should emphasize that there was a very clear division between insurance for ships and insurance for cargo. And then there were large and small policies. Now, this is a map that shows the agents of ONTAI's agents around the world. So from Bombay, Southeast Asia, Australia, China, Japan, Sakhalin, right up in the north, Hawaii, California, and the one in the south there is Callao in Peru. So it's huge expanse of operations. It insured both big and small cargoes, all right? And this is a very small policy. It's for premium payment receipt. This is for premium payment on $470 worth of goods. And the rate was $1 per 100. All right, so it's 1% premium. It's very, very low, actually. So the premium was $470. And so you can imagine that foreign firms would not take such small policies. So it was offering service at a very low level, but a very necessary level, because a lot of the trade between, say, Hong Kong and Guangzhou, or Hong Kong and Vietnam were very small quantities, but lots and lots of very small quantities. And they were also big policies too. So we look at these, unfortunately, we don't get to know about its operations except when there were disasters, and then it was reported what the loss was, right? And I should add here too, one of the reasons why studying the ONTAI insurance company has taken me so long is that I have not found a stash of material like account books or minutes of meetings. I don't have a full set of ONTAI insurance companies' documents or records. I'm not like the not like the Shandong bankers' records. I don't have those, all right? So I am coming from the other direction. I'm starting from scratch with very little to work on, right? So all the information that I could get on the ONTAI, on the policies that it had granted or issued, had to come from these shipwreck reports. So one of them was the Bombay in 1888. The ship itself was going from Shanghai to Shantou. And the ONTAI had a line of $40,000 on the ship and $800 on cargo, and it was a total loss. It just burned in near Shanghai. And the next one was a Delta. The ship was going from Haiphong to Hong Kong, and it too wrecked. And the ONTAI had insured $36,000 of the cargo, which was mainly, I think, rice. Then the third one was that I have is the Colima. The ship was going from San Francisco to Panama, so it was going south from San Francisco, and it wrecked off Mexico coast with very large loss of cargo. Only very few passengers actually survived. I don't know the exact amount that ONTAI had insured, but it's probably over $10,000, right? But even when I don't know the actual amount that ONTAI had issued, what is important is to understand that geographical span. All right, this was not just California to China, but California down to down to Mexico and Panama, which meant that ONTAI must have business there, and they must have an agent there to take care of this business. And San Francisco was extremely important to ONTAI. The Sinn, as I said, had a lot of business in California. Ever since the gold rush in 1848, after that, a lot of Chinese went to California for the gold mountain. And they set up, apart from being miners and building railroads, they also set up businesses there and became a very big market for goods, both for export to China and for import from China. And so it was quite natural for the Li Xing, who had a big business in this California trade business, to also set up agents in California as well, and insure a lot of goods on the California trade. And in fact, a lot of the information I have on the ONTAI, I have been able to get from California sources, California newspapers in particular, all right, and some of the California legal records. And as a foreign company operating in California, it was obliged to issue its statement of condition and affairs. Now, which is ironical because in Hong Kong, because it was a registered company in Hong Kong, it was supposed to issue this in Hong Kong, but I have not been able to find this anywhere in Hong Kong. All right. So I've been using the statement of the ONTAI that's been issued in California, and this is what I've got. I don't have all the years, and this is not complete. Since building this chart, I have come across other data as well. Just hang on. So I will input the extra data some of the time. But so this is the irony. A lot of the financial statements that I can find are actually from San Francisco newspapers. The only one I can find of their financial statement is in the CFO. And so this also, it's I'm not sure from a accountant's point of view, what information is actually crucial, but it shows that this is for 1884, and in 1884, it was doing pretty good business. This is all I can say. So California was important. The ONTAI Insurance Companies is another abstract from the California San Francisco newspaper. It says the ONTAI Insurance Company, which has its head offices at Hong Kong, has a unique distinction of having a loss ratio of 2,328%. It wrote $700,000 of business, had a premium income of $2,000 and losses of $47,000. Most of the loss was on the Colima. So now I'm not sure whether these figures are correct, but certainly from 1896 onwards, the company was doing much less well. I think this peak period was in the 1880s. And one of the reasons that it started to go down, it was liquidated in 1899, was because it lost a lot of business in California. It did a lot of business in California, but it withdrew from California in 1897. Now, this is kind of sad. And this was because the California companies and the Senate in California started to put pressure on foreign companies. They had been doing this for a long time. But finally, in 1897, they required foreign companies to have at least $200,000 of assets in California before they could operate. So this was a very high threshold. And so ONTAI withdrew from California. And in the process, I'm sure they lost a lot of money. But the Californians were very keen on running other foreigners out of town. And in fact, the year following, it was stipulated that only foreign companies had to be incorporated in California in order to operate there. So they were setting up very harsh requirements to get rid of the foreigners. So this is what happened. Ontai had a very big operation in California. I'm sure it was a big money maker. It also lost money in California, but it also, because of the change of laws and the change of policy and attitudes of the California government, the Ontai had to withdraw. I think that actually was a very big blow. So from 1895, 86 onwards, his business actually was going downhill. But it did continue to pay bonuses to customers. So this is in the Chinese newspaper. This is a call for the customers to come forward. And I think it was a 20% bonus for non-claim bonus. And then it also paid out dividends as late as 1897. And you will notice that it paid 12%. 12 taels per share. And it was a fixed interest. And this was set down in the prospectus. This is interesting because fixed interest was fixed dividend was quite common practice in building, all right? So many of the people who were investors actually saw this as an, like making a deposit very high interest. In 1899, the company was liquidated. And as I said, because it was incorporated under the Companies Ordinance of Hong Kong, it had to be liquidated according to that ordinance as well. And it went on for a long time. It was the notice first came up in 1899, but it took a number of years to complete. Right, in 1906, the creditors of the company were called to come forward with their claims, and the final return of capital was not made until 1907. And even in 1911, the court was still calling on contributors to come forward for unpaid dividends. So this is the end of Ontai. Now, it didn't last for a long time, but I think it was very significant. The Ontai Insurance Company was a pioneering enterprise that marked China's early entry into the insurance business and an early limited liabilities joint stock company. It experimented with new business operation, as well as new ways to raise capital and new forms of company governance. It was an ambitious endeavor. It had an international scope, resting on a wide network of associated companies, agents, correspondents, shareholders, and customers. It was a reflection of the Chinese movers and shakers in Hong Kong, with who were Chinese and foreigners, of course. But particularly, I want to bring up the Sinn and Ontai because they were Chinese merchants, but they were not compradors. And they were consciously trying to copy the methods of Western insurance companies while competing with them. And this was part of the self-strengthening ideology. Although it didn't last very long, it succeeded in making money for its shareholders and provided protection for clients. And for me, Ontai was a showcase for Huamei's abilities, and he in turn used it as a stepping stone for his own socio-economic and political advancements. Okay, I could stop here, but if Ghazan would allow me, I would just like to make a last concluding remark. And this is, the company was very much lost in history. Now, I know the company existed, but I didn't have a body of material that I could attack, like the scholars working on the Shanxi bankers. They're so lucky. I mean, they've got these volumes and volumes of records of, account books and correspondence and things to work with. So I'm working and doing a jigsaw puzzle thing from very, very scattered sources. It's a very different methodology from the Shanxi bankers and other people who were like like Thomas Larkin on the Augustine Herd papers. All right, so this is a different exercise, different methodology. But I love doing jigsaw puzzles, so that's fine. And what is worse is that apart from having a whole body of material, there is no record of the On-Tai company in the registry of companies in Hong Kong. There is a list of the limited companies registered since the enactment of the Hong Kong Company Ordinance in 1865. Now, this was compiled by somebody called S.Y. Yim. I don't know under whose authority he compiled this, but for many years he was a civil servant, all right? He worked in the Antiquities Monuments Office, and also he was the first curator of the Heritage Museum. So if you look at this, the names here, you won't find the On-Tai. In fact, you won't find many of the companies that were actually incorporated in the first 20 years or so, right? And which is kind of shocking. But what is even more shocking is that more recently, there's a publication called the Study Report on History of Company Incorporation in Hong Kong, published by the Hong Kong Companies Registry. And it used exactly the same data. You know, the first 10 companies were these first 10 companies. And it is kind of not just annoying, but kind of shocking that these mistakes get repeated. So somehow through these processes, the On-Tai was just totally sieved out of the historical records. However, I'm very happy to report that there are records in the Public Records Office which reflect the existence that the On-Tai Company Limited did exist, all right? And this is the Register of Companies fee books in 1877, and I'm really, really grateful to the Public Records Office team for pointing me to this record. And you will see from the fee book that the On-Tai actually paid the fees for registration. So they were incorporated and they paid the fees for it, all right? And in 1877, it paid to register the $500,000 of capital, and it paid for the certificate of corporation. And then a year later, they paid for registering the articles of association. They paid for all the little bits and pieces of payment that they had to make were paid in. So how the Hong Kong Registry of Companies have missed On-Tai, I don't know. But anyway, I'm going to leave this end this talk on a note of uncertainty. And it's like an unsolved murder crime. And I think we do this in history. We leave a lot of things in uncertainty, in a state of suspense, in a state of limbo. And so history is really not for the faint of heart. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elizabeth, for this wonderful talk about this really interesting case study, I think. And so we have some time now for questions and answers. So for Q&A, so if you have any questions for Professor Sinn, please submit them to the Q&A button in Zoom. And we already have our first question from Peter Hamilton. So he says, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It's a fascinating topic. I have a very particular question that may be too detailed or unknowable, but I'm curious as to, firstly, what Ho Amei's Chinese title was as quote-unquote manager of On-Tai, and secondly, how he was exactly compensated. So did he just get wages or also some kind of equity in the company?
Hello, Peter. His title was Tongzhi, which is kind of assistant magistrate. And the Chinese officials and refer to him as such. So he was very highly regarded by Li Hongzhang, and his telegraph company was really endorsed by Li Hongzhang as well. I think he was paid a salary. I'm not sure. I have no record. I only know that there were bonuses paid to the manager and directors, but it's very sort of so there's one line there that says paying the managers and the directors, the chairman, the directors, and the bonus of 700. So I suppose the manager would get some bonus, but it's not specific here what he got. I suppose he must also get a salary, maybe commissions as well. He never became very rich. But I think he was unstoppable with trying out new ideas. He was just full of ideas and so always revving to go. So very energetic man. Not very nice. He could be very abrasive, and he made a lot of enemies by being abrasive. He was certainly very abrasive to the Hong Kong government. He spent a lot of time writing letters in the newspapers to criticize the government and how they did things.
All right, thank you. One question I have that I wanted to ask is, I mean, I'm amazed by this kind of global network of branches and representative offices that they kind of set up for this company. So I wonder whether you know anything more, who actually at these different, let's say in San Francisco or in Peru, who actually managed the affairs of the company there. I mean, I think in one of the adverts you showed that they were represented through an agent there, I guess through another Chinese company. But I mean, did they also hire their own staff, or did they train their own staff in these overseas branches, or was it usually done through agents of some sort?
Well, actually, I don't have the details, but I know that they had an office in Singapore, and they were very quite a big operation in Singapore with ships inspectors and clerks and other things like that. But Singapore was they also had a lot of business in Penang. That was one of their big business. In San Francisco, it's really strange because almost every year they changed their agent. I don't know why they did that, but sometimes they would use the Lai Hong, which was their branch, one of their branch offices from Hong Kong, right? So it was very very changeful, right? I don't know why they did that. There must be a reason for doing that. But the main thing was the agents in California in particular were always the leading Chinese companies in San Francisco. Right. So they worked on a very high at a very high level.
Right, thank you. That's very interesting.
Can I jump into the question?
Yes, please do, John. Yeah.
Elizabeth, so in looking at the records of this company, do you see their registration in Hong Kong under the British regime? How that might have conferred a special status on them as they operated such a vast network that extended far afield from the British colony, or was it more of their Chinese management of by people of Chinese descent? How did that create some tension in their interactions overseas?
I think it was very complicated, right? On the one hand, they had many different identities. So in China, for instance, the company was always referred to as the On-Tai Company of Hong Kong, right? Incorporated Limited. It always had this sort of limited thing there. It was always mentioned as a 公司, which in Chinese, it was at that time meant a limited company. Right? Only limited companies were called 公司. Sometimes called 有限公司. So to the Chinese customers, I think on the mainland, it being incorporated in the British law was an important thing because it was very transparent. All right, everybody knew what the liabilities was and what the debt level was and so forth, right? which was very uncommon to Chinese companies, right? Chinese companies are much more opaque, much more close. It didn't have any special status in Hong Kong. The British did not give it any special status. In California, the foreign companies just thought this is partly they were Chinese, so they would take away all the Chinese business in San Francisco. But the US people who were the lawmakers, the Senate, the California Senate, just looked at them as foreign companies. So when they wanted to get rid of all the foreign companies, they also got rid of the foreign companies like the Yangtze Insurance Company or the Chinese Traders Insurance Company, which were based in Hong Kong, but were actually owned or run by foreigners, right? And all their, so because it had a number of identities, different people looked at it differently. But I think to the Chinese customers and Chinese investors, being incorporated had a special meaning. It made it more transparent. But I would advise people to read Michael Ng's work on bankruptcy law, because it really shows the environment of Chinese businesses in the absence of commercial law in China, right, in the 19th century. And how this introducing the bankruptcy law, in fact, worsened the situation because people would just declare bankrupt.
Thanks.
Great. We have a few questions now from Professor Billy So, also our colleague from the Institute as well. So he says, thank you so much for the fascinating story. And then has, well, two questions first and another one at the end. But the first question is whether it was a criminal offense not to register as a joint stock company with limited liability under the 1865 Company Ordinance in Hong Kong. The second question is about ONTAI's registration in Hong Kong. Is there a record of it in the registered companies in the Hong Kong government companies registries? And then the final question is whether you have any knowledge of which Hong Kong law firm was working as ONTAI, or I guess for ONTAI. That's the last question. Any idea which Hong Kong law firm was working as ONTAI?
Okay. When the company's ordinance was introduced, it was not compulsory. All right, companies could be registered or they didn't have to be registered. In fact, companies like Jardines were not did not register. They just used their old reputation to support their operations, right? Instead of having to go into becoming an incorporated company. It was pretty open, and not many companies, as I said, the old British companies did not register. It was not criminal at all. There was no compulsion at all. Well, this is the point, Billy, and that is the register of companies does not have any record of ONTAI. I've been writing to them and they write back and say, oh, we have no records. And I have to show them what I found in the PRO to say, well, look, they did pay the fees back in 1877, so they must have been registered, right? So anyway, I know that if you go online to the register of companies, they will, give you information on companies if you give them the name. So, years ago, I did this with ONTAI and I couldn't find the record. And at that time, I just sort of left it. But now, since I'm really writing this thing seriously, I went back to them again and they said, no, we have no records, Well, when I told them, when I challenged them and said, well, the Public Records Office has its records, right? And they came back and said, well, we'll look into this and we will. I actually suggested that I should be able to go there and actually look at their registry. What does their registry look like? The law firm that worked for them was the Hastings. Sorry, it's the Deacons. Yeah, but I tried Deacons. I've looked through some of the Deacons records out in the Hong Kong Library, but I haven't been able to find on that either. But I'll try again. It could be under some very obscure item.
All right, thank you. We have one more question from Jin Sun, who says, thank you so much for your amazing lecture, Professor Sinn. Could you elaborate a little bit more about the on-time insurance liquidation? Was it related to the death of Li Xing and the enormous inheritance tax?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is an interesting question because Li Xing died in 1900, I think. Yeah. So he died after the company was liquidated. I'm not sure. I mean, this is a very good question, and I have to try and find Li Xing's will to see maybe something was going on. Yeah, definitely. And the thing is also, this is really funny because Hoa Mei died in 1901. Right, so these two guys died just around. I don't know whether they died from heart attack because the company had lost money or what. But yeah, these are just some of the things about history. You have a lot of coincidences, right? And it's sometimes hard to draw the connection between one and the other. What I really would like to know is whether the liquidation. What is interesting too, and let me just show you this. The liquidation was done under this man, Chen Ping, right? It was not Li Xing anymore. And Hoa Mei's name is no longer there. Right. So we don't know by September 1899 what the politics within the government, within the company was, right? Whether they were fighting over things or people had dropped out or so. I hope somebody would study this. I'm not going to do this. I'm going back to Hoa Mei. I'm moving on to his telegraph company. I'm moving on to, I published one article on the mining. So I got to move on with Hoa Mei's life and put my book together. But I think this is the kind of work that a younger scholar like Jin should do. I mean, if you could find the material, it'd be so interesting because this would really make the case study so much more substantial. Right now, I've really just got the skeleton of the company, right? This is not, as I said, it's not a company history, it's not business history, but somebody is interested in company histories, or maybe they be able to find something in California, I don't know. One never knows. Yeah. But my puzzle is looks like this at this moment, right? There might be other pieces coming up. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a comment from Anthony Leung who says, thank you, Professor Sinn. This is not a question, but rather an observation. An insurance company named East Asia Aetna Insurance Company, and later changed to Aetna, was established in the 1980s in Hong Kong. And it so happened that its Chinese name was the name as that of the Antai Insurance Company, Antai. Yeah. So I wonder.
Okay. The East Asia Aetna was a joint venture between Aetna of United States, the Aetna Insurance Company, and the Bank of East Asia.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it has nothing to do with the Antai. I don't know. Actually, this is an interesting question because I wrote the history of the Bank of East Asia. I wrote two histories of the Bank of East Asia. I never actually noted that the Chinese name. But thank you, Anthony, for calling my attention to that. Yeah. But I don't think I don't think there is any real connection between this, a coincidence. maybe it's a coincidence. Maybe it's all fated in my life that I should come across these on-Thai companies.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Probably a last question, but we have another question from Zhang Junfeng, our own student at the institute. He says, "Thank you for this fascinating Chinese non-comprador insurance company case. I wonder whether there is any inspiration the on-Thai company stirred up on later Chinese-led insurance companies in Hong Kong, or is the on-Thai case an isolated attempt of certain Chinese business or social elites entering the insurance business?"
Yeah, actually, there was right after on-Thai was established, there was another company called Man On, just one on. It was called Man On Insurance Company, and a few years later, there was another one called the Yan Zai, I think. Yeah. So Chinese insurance companies continue to come up. All right. It's very good business. I mean, of course, it's very risky, but on the whole, it's good business. And the Manon went on for many years. Yeah. And of course, it did start a trend in Chinese insurance companies, Chinese-owned insurance companies.
Great. Unless there are any final questions, I think because we're already running out of time, I'm afraid. But unless there are any final questions, which I think there aren't for now, what remains for me to do, Elizabeth, is thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us about on-Thai. And I'm sure we all sort of wanted to see this in writing, but also your larger book on Huamei. I think we're all waiting for that, so we're and looking forward to it. So thank you very much. Before closing, I should say that this was the last seminar of the Business History webinar for this semester, but we'll be back next semester, of course, and we already have lined up a very exciting program, which we'll publish soon, so please keep an eye out for that. Before we close, thanks again for everyone to tune in, and Elizabeth, thank you very much for taking the time to give us such a wonderful talk.
Yes, thank you very much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.